When you think of Mark Twain, you probably picture the icon, right? The white suit, that wild hair, the razor-sharp wit. But the man himself? He was so much more complex than the myth. He was a puzzle, really. A man kind of haunted by this idea of having two different selves living inside the same body. So let's peel back those layers and get to the heart of the fascinating contradiction that was Mark Twain.
And this quote? It's the key to everything. He basically admitted that everything he wrote was just an attempt to figure himself out. His fiction wasn't just for entertainment, it was a really personal quest to make sense of his own life, to try and bridge the gap between the person he was and the person he'd become.
So what are these two selves we're talking about? Well, on one hand, you've got Samuel Clemens, the boy from a little town in Missouri, a guy totally shaped by family hardship and a past he just couldn't shake. And then, on the other hand, there's Mark Twain, the literary giant, the global celebrity, the myth he built so carefully. The real story, the interesting part, happens in the push and pull between these two.
All right, so first up, the two Twains. To really solve this puzzle, we've got to look right past that famous persona and try to find the actual man at the center of it all, Samuel Clemens.
And to do that, we have to go way back to the beginning, to his boyhood on the river, because his entire creative life, literally everything, was shaped by what he called the Hannibal Decade. That was his childhood, right on the banks of the Mississippi.
His early life was anything but a walk in the park. The family moved to Hannibal when he was just 4, but when his father died when he was 12, everything changed. It forced him to drop out of school and start working, and that's really where the seeds of anxiety that would follow him his whole life were planted.
Can you just imagine the weight of those words? Cling to the land and wait. His father died of failure in a country obsessed with success, leaving behind nothing but some worthless land and that haunting piece of advice. That single moment instilled a deep, deep financial anxiety in Samuel Clemens that, honestly, he could never get rid of.
And that anxiety only got worse with his early jobs. At just 15, he goes to work for his brother Orion's newspaper. He was promised a weekly wage, but he ended up feeling like it was involuntary servitude. He never saw a single dime. You can just see how these early betrayals and hardships became the emotional bedrock of his life, shaping the man, and of course, the writer he would one day become.
But here's the thing. This is the genius of Mark Twain. He took that haunted past, all that pain and anxiety, and he turned it into his greatest asset. He figured out how to mine it for gold.
The big breakthrough moment came, of all places, during a hike back in 1874. I mean, he was already a famous author by then, but as he was walking with his friend, he just started telling all these stories about his old life as a riverboat pilot, a life that must have felt like a million miles away from his current one.
And his friend's reaction? It changed absolutely everything. What a virgin subject! It seems so obvious to us now, doesn't it? But incredibly, Twain himself hadn't seen it that way. This was his aha moment, a total lightning bolt.
That one conversation just opened the floodgates. He suddenly saw his Mississippi boyhood not as something he had to escape from, but as the mother lode, this rich, untapped source of material that was uniquely his to tell.
And this realization, it led directly to a massive creative explosion. He immediately poured it all into a series for the Atlantic called Old Times on the Mississippi. But that just unlocked something even bigger, and it led him to finally finish the novel that would come to define him, The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. He even admitted later, "I am Tom Sawyer."
So with all this success came just enormous fame and wealth. Mark Twain became a full-blown Gilded Age celebrity, and he was living a life that young Samuel Clemens could have only dreamed about.
For starters, he built this, a massive 11,500 square foot mansion in Hartford. It was basically a palace, a towering symbol of just how far that boy from Missouri had come.
But his mind was never, ever still. It was just a constant stream of what he called useful trifles. He was dreaming up everything from a special bed clamp for kids to a self-pasting scrapbook, which, hey, was actually a commercial success. His imagination wasn't just literary, it was mechanical, it was restless, and yeah, maybe a little bit manic.
And yet, and this is the crazy part, for all his creative brilliance, he was a terrible businessman. Just awful. That old financial anxiety never went away, and he sank fortunes into these speculative ventures, like a new engraving process called the collotype, that almost always failed. It pushed him to the brink of bankruptcy more than once.
And this, right here, this gets to the heart of it all. That internal war he was fighting, between the anxious boy and the famous author, between creative genius and financial failure, well, it wasn't just his story.
In so many ways, it was America's story too.
You know, he was celebrated everywhere. He was even awarded an honorary degree from Yale. But he always had what he called a delicate ego about being labeled a mere humorist. He felt like that label was just too small for what he was trying to do. It was almost like he knew his work had a much deeper mission.
Because for Twain, humor wasn't just about telling jokes. Oh no. He saw it as a weapon. The humorist's real job, as he saw it, was to expose frauds, fight superstition, and tear down privilege. It was social warfare, but with a punchline.
So, here we are, back where we started, the two selves. On one side, Samuel Clemens, the man who was forever wrestling with his past and all his anxieties. And on the other, Mark Twain, the icon who used those very struggles to become the voice of a generation. The two were in constant conflict, sure, but they were also in constant conversation. And this is the ultimate takeaway, really. Mark Twain's genius didn't exist in spite of his contradictions. It was born from them. He found his own voice and the voice of a nation in that chaotic, messy space between the man he was and the myth he created.
Which leaves us with one final big question. By embracing all of his own messy, brilliant contradictions, was Mark Twain just telling his own story? Or was he actually capturing the true, contradictory, and always changing voice of America itself?